Matt Schauf and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to preview Week 14 of the fantasy football season. We've got some impactful injuries to look at here, Jared. We've got some surprise Week 13 performances that we got to assess, figure out if they're guys to use going forward or just blips. And then there are some QB situations to kind of sort out, whether they're QBs that we use or whether they're QBs that affect the players around them. All of it needs to be looked at. We're going to start with the Texans passing game, which, of course, we know about that quarterback already, but he lost one of his key weapons this past week when Tank Dell suffered a season-ending leg fracture. I mean, third-round rookie has been a revelation that I think even before we get to this week, like Tank Dell for me is going to make me look differently at wide receivers coming into the draft. I'm not just going to dismiss a small guy who was super productive in college and has other markers working in his favor. What about you?
I think C.J. Stroud's a big marker in his favor, which, I don't think anyone predicted Stroud to be this good, this fast, which has definitely helped Tank Dell. But yeah, I mean, we were talking about Dell's dynasty value earlier this week, and like you can make an argument for him atop this rookie wide receiver class at this point. I think there's like 4 or 5 guys kind of in that mix, but what Dell did in his 8 full games, 8.4 targets per game, 5.1 catches, 77 yards, 0.9 touchdowns per game. So obviously big loss for fantasy owners, big loss for NFL fans. The Texans have become like appointment viewing for me, at least always on, the biggest TV on Sunday. I wanted to watch Stroud and company. So a big loss for CJ Stroud too. Cause I mean, you have Nico Collins who really should smash the rest of the way. Like, the Texans schedule is pretty challenging. At least, 2 of their next 4 matchups are challenging against the Jets and Browns. It's the Titans and the, 2 games in between those, but Collins should dominate targets here. I think we're expecting Noah Brown to be the number 2 guy here just because he's, been their next best receiver. And he had those 2 big games when Nico Collins was out earlier this year. But I mean, behind those 2 guys, you have John Mechie and Robert Woods. So it's a big loss for CJ Stroud. And again, you factor in the matchup both this week and then the Browns matchup. I don't think Stroud is a must bench this week. He's also not a must start, though. I think there are, guys you might have rostered, guys might even be available on the waiver wire that you could consider starting over Stroud in this matchup against the Jets on Sunday.
Yeah, I think he's even a toss-up versus the quarterback that we're going to talk about next. But first, with these Texans, I think the overarching takeaways, like you said, Nico Collins should be a clear every week bet for strong target share. He's got that bad matchup against the Jets this week. I would not be surprised if he disappoints production-wise, but I'd have a tough time benching him for this matchup unless I'm really strong at wide receiver because he should see plenty of targets in this game, basically a weekly starter the rest of the way. But what else? I mean, you mentioned Noah Brown. I think he is the next guy up just because he has showed us some upside this year and others have not. There are Robert Woods and John Mechie around. I mean, we'll see if either one of those guys does anything. My bet for now is that neither one's going to be fantasy relevant for these final 4 weeks of most seasons. So I don't really care between them. If you want to pick one of them up off the waiver wire, I think more interesting is the tight end situation. Dalton Schultz missed last week, was limited the week before. He returned to a limited practice Wednesday with that hamstring injury. So we're going to have to track his status this week, see what we can find out about his expected role heading into the game, and maybe just watch him in this game rather than play him in most fantasy lineups unless you need to, and see if that, down usage the week before he missed the game was just because of the hamstring injury, or if there was something else at play if they do want to get Brevin Jordan more involved late in this season.
Yeah, and it's actually a good matchup for Texans tight end. The Jets are much, much stronger against wide receivers than tight end. So like if Schultz was out this week, I think Brevin Jordan would be in play as a lower end tight end 1 option. If Schultz is back, I think I'm kind of with you between the usage dip last time out and the fact that he's coming back from a hamstring injury. I would try not to use Dalton Schultz, but going forward week 15 and beyond, again, with Tank Dell out, if Schultz gets healthy and is back in a, something close to a full-time role, there's definitely an opportunity for him to be a fantasy starter again. I mean, the Browns matchup is brutal, right? They've been the best team against tight ends this season. So even there, you probably wouldn't want to use them. But again, those 2 Titans games, I think, Dalton Schultz and Noah Brown will be guys that are, in the mix, as lower end fantasy options for those 2 games, at least.
And the Houston backfield's just going to be annoying the rest of the way. So you should prepare for that. They have the Jets this week. Then they're at the Titans, home for the Browns, home for the Titans. That Tennessee matchup has not been good for running back usage. The Jets and Browns are just good defenses overall, although not as strong against the run as against the pass. I think overall, with it being not a great rushing slate and with the Tank Dell injury, should be a positive for Devin Singletary. We'll have to kind of watch how their usage goes and just how game script goes. But Devin Singletary's going to be involved even if the team is running and has more of the receiving upside than Dameon Pierce if things poorly or if the run game's just not working.
Yeah, I mean, the Texans' backs just haven't been very involved in the passing game in general. I think, Singletary had the one game 2 weeks ago where he had, 6 or 7 targets. Other than that, Pierce and Singletary have both been, used pretty sparingly in the passing game. We'll see if that changes with Tank Dell's absence. I'm kind of betting against it. I think it'll be more, just to the other wide receivers and potentially to the tight end. So I don't think Singletary or Pierce are going to be very helpful the rest of the way.
It would not be shocking if C.J. Stroud is outscored this week by Josh Dobbs. Jared, I'm not sure that I could make that decision in my own lineup. I don't think I'm facing it anywhere, so I don't have to specifically make it for myself. But Josh Dobbs is going to start for the Vikings again. And really, they didn't have another option. I can understand wanting to check your options and consider making a change. But is Jaren Hall an improvement? We have no idea. Is Nick Mullins an improvement? Probably not. We've seen him play a number of NFL games to this point. They've obviously seen him in practice. Josh Dobbs is a limited NFL quarterback, which is why he has been on 2 teams this year and been traded twice since August. But he has fantasy upside. 6 top 12 fantasy finishes this year. Only 9 quarterbacks have more of those than Josh Dobbs does. Now he gets Justin Jefferson back for the first time since Dobbs arrived in Minnesota. So what do you make of Josh Dobbs for week 14 and maybe beyond?
Yeah, I think just the widest range of outcomes among quarterbacks this week, right? Like I think he could score 25 fantasy points. He could struggle in the first half and get pulled and, totally kill you with, single digit fantasy points. Like you said, you get Jefferson back, you get the rushing with Josh Dobbs, which has really been there, across his starts with both Arizona and Minnesota. You get a game indoors in Vegas. The Vikings have a 21.75 point implied total, which not awesome, but it's 11th highest this week. And what's expected to be another low scoring week, kind of a middling matchup against Vegas. They are 10th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks, just 18th in pass defense DVOA. So again, I think it's kind of a neutral matchup. And just going back to Stroud real quick. I mean, he gets the Jets, who have just faced an incredibly tough slate of quarterbacks. They've faced a lot of elite quarterbacks. They have won most of those matchups. Here are how these, high-end quarterbacks have finished against the Jets this season. Josh Allen, quarterback 19. Dak Prescott, quarterback 17. Patrick Mahomes, quarterback 17. Jalen Hurts, quarterback 2. He scored a rushing touchdown in that game to sort of, boost his production. Justin Herbert, quarterback 25. Josh Allen, quarterback 5 in the rematch. That was mostly passing. Allen was had the most success against the Jets pass defense of anyone this season. And then Tua Tagovailoa a couple weeks ago, quarterback 22. So again, the Jets have faced a bunch of these high-end quarterbacks and really kept most of them outside the top 12. So I think if Josh Dobbs does not get benched in this game, I feel pretty good about his chances of outscoring C.J. Stroud this week. And if I had that decision, I think, at this point of the week, maybe it changes in the next 48 hours, but I think at this point of the week, I would start Josh Dobbs over C.J. Stroud this week.
I would probably lean that way as well. Josh Dobbs and Desmond Ridder are probably the 2 guys this week that have a shot of getting yanked from the game if they turn the ball over twice in the first half. And you have to factor that into your decision. So if you ask me this week, should I start Josh Dobbs or CJ Stroud, Josh Dobbs or Jared Goff, Gardner Minshew, Baker Mayfield? My honest answer is going to be it's up to you, because all those guys are in the same territory. If Dobbs doesn't turn the ball over early, if he does make it through this whole game against the Raiders, he has at least as much upside as everybody else in that range and probably more. So I would probably lean toward Dobbs in my own lineup. I did pick him up over Baker Mayfield in one spot where I need a quarterback this week. There's plenty of upside, but you got to know the risk. That's what makes it a personal decision more than, just a fantasy evaluation. We can all look at him and see the upside, but we can't say that if he throws a first quarter interception, will he get pulled immediately? It might happen, and then you're going to be kicking yourself. So good luck. Now, if Josh Dobbs does come back to this game, plays better than he did against the Bears before the bye, they've got a nice finish. They're at the Raiders this week, at the Bengals, versus the Lions, versus the Packers. So if he settles things down, he could be a good fantasy quarterback the rest of the way. I would hope that Minnesota gives him a little bit of a leash because, I mean, Josh Dobbs is what he is. They should have known in trading for him that they weren't getting a stud who was a safe starter every week. They're getting kind of the best of what's available in a thin market.
Yeah, and the bye week should help him too, right? I mean, remember he came in and was forced to play 3 days after joining the team or whatever, and then made a few starts beyond that. So having had this bye week to maybe actually learn the offense a little bit, should help Dobbs the rest of the way.
Patrick Mahomes was a guy that you mentioned in there as struggling against the Jets. He hasn't been awesome overall lately. We have him lower than usual in our rankings. He's QB8 this week, but I wonder, Jared, if even that is overrating Patrick Mahomes some versus how he has performed lately. He's been an outside the top 12 quarterback for like the past month or so in fantasy. Yeah. And I know that there's always, some worry about benching Patrick Mahomes, especially when you get late in the season. If you lose and Patrick Mahomes goes for 30 points on your bench, then you're going to hate yourself forever for that. I'm just not sure that he has that in him right now. What about you?
Yeah, well, he's quarterback 8 in points per game on the season. He only has 2 top 5 finishes the entire season. He has no finish better than quarterback 9 among his last 5. So he has been producing as like a fringy quarterback 1. Now, on paper, he should probably be ranked a bit lower than we have him, but it's still Patrick Mahomes. He's still, to me, the most talented quarterback I've ever seen, which does factor into this stuff. And you get this game against Buffalo where, on paper, both defenses are pretty solid. The offenses, especially the Chiefs, obviously have been underwhelming. But like when these two teams get together, there's a chance this game turns into a shootout. To me, like if I have Mahomes, I would not be banking on him carrying me to a fantasy title, but I'm also like I'm not going to bench him again. Most of these weeks he hasn't been killing you. He's been running quite a bit. He's up over like 20, 25 rushing yards per game, and it's been pretty consistent. Week in, week out, 20 to 30 rushing yards per game, which helps. And then again, I think he has the upside because he's Patrick Mahomes. So I think you stick with him. Even though he's not going to, return the price you paid for him in drafts.
If you have Mahomes and say Brock Purdy or C.J. Stroud, maybe even Jordan Love on your roster, I can see spots over these final 4 games where it would be fine to start the other guy over Mahomes, even if that feels gross. If you have somebody who's been performing very well versus even Mahomes, who has been just meh, then it's okay to make that decision. Like you said, I wouldn't be reaching too far to play somebody over Mahomes this week. I can't see playing Russell Wilson even over Mahomes. He's 2 spots behind him in the rankings. I couldn't live with myself if I lost a matchup because I played Russell Wilson over Mahomes. And I think it's really going to be that kind of decision the rest of the way. We can look at the numbers and say, it's not the same Mahomes, but can he be that in any given week? Maybe. It's quite possible he and Travis Kelce just, go nuts in a given game and he doesn't need that much from his wideouts, which is the biggest limitation on this version of Mahomes. So get ready to make some personal decisions. Get ready to find Mahomes a little bit lower in the rankings than you're used to. And, there might be times where he scores below that lower ranking as well.
The schedule is fine. Like by our adjusted points allowed numbers, it's not awesome, but Buffalo, New England, Las Vegas, Cincinnati, none of those defenses worry me, even if they're not, again, by the numbers, great matchups. To me, Purdy, I would have to look at Purdy's schedule, but I would start Purdy over Mahomes this week and probably most weeks going forward. That's kind of like the line for me. Like, guys like Russell Wilson, even Josh Dobbs, I'd be sticking with Mahomes in most cases over those types.
Yeah, I'd have a real hard time starting Josh Dobbs over Patrick Mahomes, regardless of their matchups. I probably could not bring myself to do that. Yep. The Bears this week have a running back question, somebody that we looked at in setting our running back rankings for the week, and something to watch going forward because it's an interesting backfield. I'm not sure that it's going to wind up being interesting for fantasy, though. What do you expect from this Bears backfield in week 14 and beyond? Or, what are you even hoping for if we don't know what to expect?
Well, we don't know what to expect because week 1 is the only time this season that we have had Roschon Johnson, Khalil Herbert, and Donta Foreman healthy on the field together for the entire game. You had, Donta Foreman was a healthy scratch for, the weeks 2 through 5, I believe. You had Khalil Herbert suffer an ankle injury. Roschon Johnson missed time with a concussion. Even, week 11, we had these guys all active to start the game, but then Donta Foreman left with an ankle injury. So that, we can't even really look at that. Now, last time out before the bye week, we saw Roschon Johnson dominate backfield work, 75% of the Bears offensive snaps. That was the second highest mark by a Bears running back all season. He finished with 10 carries and 5 targets in that game. Of course, again, Dante Foreman did not play in that game. So this is a situation ideally you want to wait and see, right? If Roschon Johnson continues in that role, then he's someone we can, trust, at least as an RB3 flex type the rest of the way. But again, tough to know what to expect just because we haven't seen these guys all healthy. And then it's also a pretty negative matchup against the Lions, who have, really struggled lately against the pass, but their run defense has remained pretty solid.
Yeah, my default position is I'm not interested in any of them because it has not been a good situation for running back points. And now we do have probably all 3 of them healthy, all 3 of them playing a role. Dante Foreman started the season not playing for them at all, but then just like with his past couple teams, once he got onto the field, the team's like, oh, this guy's actually helpful to us. And the last time out before he injured that ankle, he was running right with the starters at the beginning of the game before hurting the ankle. So I expect him to be plenty involved. I expect it to be more of a share than any fantasy manager wants it to be. I hope that we get Roschon Johnson controlling this backfield the rest of the way. But unless we have the coaches saying, yeah, we're going to give the rookie a look as our top back because we want to see what he can do, we believe in him, whatever. If they give us any indication that they're going to lean in his direction, I'm on board. I think stashing Roschon Johnson on your roster is a good idea right now because he makes the most sense as somebody that would get more work down the stretch. He's the guy with the most long-term upside, the guy that I would think that they would want to emerge at the end of this year and beyond. But we don't have any reason to expect one running back to get a controlling share immediately coming out of the bye. We'll say this matchup that has been more negative for rushing than for passing against the Lions got better this week when Detroit put defensive tackle Alan McNeil on IR. He is the team's highest graded run defender among the front 7. So maybe we get a bit more Bears rushing and rushing success in this game than we might otherwise expect.
Yeah, definitely possible. I think I saw it's supposed to be crappy weather in Chicago too on Sunday, which, not a surprise. The Bears running backs have seen more targets, I think, than you might expect this season. If you combine Johnson, Foreman, and Herbert, they're up over 60 total targets. And I think that's what makes Johnson most exciting is I do think he's, pretty easily the best pass catcher among these 3. So like he's the one that has the chance to lead the backfield in both carries and targets. Hopefully we get, like an Ian Rappaport, Roschon Johnson's going to get the bulk of the carries today on Sunday morning. Then we can feel a bit better about using him in lineups. But if we don't get anything like that, I think ideally it's a situation you want to wait and see on.
And of course, for those RB targets, we also got 4.5 games of Tyson Bagent in place of Justin Fields, which is bound to be a plus for running backs getting stuff in the passing game. Speaking of the passing game, the Jaguars took a big hit late in that Monday night loss to the Bengals when Trevor Lawrence suffered the ankle sprain. Maybe it's a high ankle, maybe it's a low ankle, whatever. He's looking unlikely to play this week against Cleveland. So, Jared, what do we do with that? What do we do with the loss of Christian Kirk? Are we picking people up? Are we interested in Jaguars pass catchers this week and beyond?
This week, no, for the most part. I think, Calvin Ridley, you kind of might be stuck with him. If he's, one of your top 3 guys, I could see that. But I mean, it's C.J. Beathard who looked okay in relief of Trevor Lawrence on Monday night. I think he can at least be serviceable. It's not going to be, like a Tim Boyle situation out there with Beathard. It'll probably be closer to, Zach Wilson level. It's the matchup against Cleveland that kind of makes me shy away from all these guys. Cleveland's defense has taken a bit of a step back, I think, lately. You have Myles Garrett, who's playing at less than 100%. They were without Denzel Ward last week, but it looks like he's going to be back this week. So the secondary will be at full strength. So it's a tough passing game matchup, and we've seen offenses all season lean heavily toward the run against Cleveland. Cleveland is 30th in pass rate over expected against. So that, plus the fact that it's probably going to be a backup quarterback for the Jags, and the fact that the Browns offense probably won't score a whole lot. I just don't think you're going to get a ton of passing volume from Jacksonville this weekend, and whatever volume you do get is, very likely going to be less efficient with C.J. Beathard under there. I mean, going forward, if you get Lawrence back, I think, Ridley gets a boost with no Christian Kirk. I think Zay Jones could be a factor if Trevor Lawrence is healthy, but this week I would try to avoid this passing game.
Yeah, Evan Ingram's the one I would feel most quote unquote comfortable with this week because of his shorter ADOT. He should make more sense for whatever quarterback's in there. Comfortable is definitely in air quotes. I'm not comfy with any of them. At tight end, I'm unlikely to have multiple options, but I would try not to play Calvin Ridley. He's at the bottom of wide receiver 3 territory in our rankings. Zay Jones is well outside that. And Parker Washington is the guy that most people probably had never even heard of before Monday night, who came on for 6 catches. I mean, Is he maybe Christian Kirk the rest of the way? Is he somebody worth a redraft pickup?
It'd have to be a super deep league, I think. If Lawrence was healthy, I'd be more interested in Parker Washington, right? But again, like I think this week you're not using him. You probably want to wait and see week 15 what he does with Trevor Lawrence, like maybe week 16, 17. Again, it'd have to be a super deep league. Dynasty, he's worth grabbing, right? Because he flashed a little bit. Calvin Ridley's a free agent after this season, so there's opportunity for Washington to carve out a role. But you'd have to be super desperate in redraft to use him, I think.
Yeah, and we mentioned the matchup this week. After this comes Baltimore, and then in week 17 is a Carolina matchup that's been bad for passing games all season. Yeah. So that definitely makes it harder to be optimistic for really any of these pieces. Let's hope that you don't need a Jaguars passing game piece the rest of the way.
Yeah, for sure. Next week's brutal. Tampa Bay is a great matchup in week 16, and Carolina is doable. I mean, they're just so bad against the run that teams don't throw on them. But yeah, it's not a super scary passing matchups. I think, like Ridley and even Zay Jones, will definitely be in play in week 16. And I think, Ridley, at least it will be usable week 17.
The passing game injuries are also, I think, sneakily injurious to Travis Etienne's outlook. He's been a low efficiency, touchdown dependent running back all season. So now the offense is going to be worse with Trevor Lawrence out and then less than 100% when he comes back. Travis Etienne is somebody that I don't comfortably start at this point, and I'm going to have to seriously weigh against people that I probably would not have been weighing him against before.
The Jags are implied for 13.75 points this week, so it's tough to bank on a touchdown from Travis Etienne. Again, I do think the volume should be there because of the backup quarterback, because they're playing this run funnel Browns defense. I mean, how efficient he is, that's definitely a question. And again, he's probably not a great touchdown bet. So he sits in RB2 range in our rankings this week. Etienne is not a must start. There could be some fantasy teams out there that have 2, even 3 running backs that are better options. But again, I still think he's a pretty good bet to end up with 15 to 20 touches on Sunday.
I'm probably playing Jaylen Warren over him in Thursday night game against New England in my own lineup.
I mean, we'll see about Najee Harris. That's tough to weigh at this point. I think we'll get
even with Najee Harris in the lineup. I'm playing Jaylen Warren, I think.
Okay.
On the other side of that Jacksonville-Cleveland matchup, we've got Elijah Moore. Jared, after last week, are you trusting Elijah Moore as a fantasy starter in week 14?
Yeah, I'm trusting him as a wide receiver 3 at least, with I think upside beyond that. That's assuming Amari Cooper sits with his concussion, which we know is likely. It's about 80% of players this season have missed at least one game with concussion. So we're expecting Cooper to be out. Last week with Joe Flacco, which I do think matters because they spent time together with the Jets, and Moore actually had some nice games with Joe Flacco with the Jets. Season high 12 targets for Elijah Moore last week, a 27% target share. I think what's most interesting, 20.3 yard average depth of target for Moore last week. Now, I think that has more to do with Cooper's injury than Joe Flacco. I think once Cooper exited, they were like, we need someone to stretch the field. Elijah Moore, hey, he can actually do it. They haven't let him do that throughout the season, but he can do it. He showed he could do it. He made at least one long catch downfield last week. So I think you're going to have more back in that type of role, assuming Cooper is out this week. And the Jags are 27th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. It's kind of an opposite of the Browns, kind of a pass funnel defense. They're much tougher against the run than the pass. Moore should get enough volume to be, someone that's usable, at least as a wide receiver 3.
Can he pay off as a wide receiver 3? Yes. Do I trust him? Absolutely not. 12 targets last week, 4 catches, 4 for 83 yards, 44 pass attempts from Joe Flacco. He completed 52% of them. So it was completely volume. And even on all that volume and those deep targets that you mentioned, it was still flimsy production against the Rams, who are okay, but certainly not a tough defense. So Elijah Moore sits wide receiver 29 in our PPR ranks right now. I don't think that's a terrible spot, but I wouldn't start him over these guys that are currently behind him in the rankings. Jaden Reed, Brandon Cooks, Gabe Davis. There's some other guys that I could go either way on, but I like those guys better in their recent production, in their current situation, and just the upside of their offenses.
Yeah, I'm starting Moore over those guys, and I'd even have him a couple spots higher in our rankings. Like I probably lean towards Elijah Moore over Tyler Lockett. I might even start him over Cooper Kupp, who was about to bust again last week before scoring a late touchdown, and they're playing the Ravens. So Moore isn't someone I'd force in my lineup, but I do think in that wide receiver 3 range, I feel pretty good about him.
I don't know. He spent all of last year irrelevant with the Jets. He spent almost all of this year irrelevant with the Browns. It's just at some point you got to stop believing that he's a good player, I think.
I think he's good still. And I mean, the Cooper injury is huge, right? I mean, it takes away the lead target in the passing game.
Another do we trust player coming off of injury this time, Dallas Goedert. He was a full practice participant Wednesday, coming off of the arm fracture that he suffered last time they played Dallas. They've got a rematch with Dallas this week. Jared, are you trusting Dallas Goedert in your lineup for week 14, assuming that he's ready to go and there's no big questions heading into Sunday?
Yeah, and it was a broken forearm. So, like, he's been able to stay in shape. And I expect him to play his usual role, especially in this massive game for the Eagles. I mean, they've been targeting this game to bring him back. I definitely think Goddard's usable. I don't think he's a must-start top 5 tight end option, just because that's not what he was even before the injury this season. Through week 9, before he went down in week 10, Goedert was tight end 11 in PPR points per game. He was only tight end 15 in expected PPR points per game. He had 2 top 5 finishes in those 8 games, but he was outside the top 12 tight ends in the other 6. It's just, we had AJ Brown dominating targets even when Goedert was healthy, and we had Devonta Smith in there too. So just, Goedert wasn't getting the type of volume he had been in previous seasons. So again, for that reason, I don't think he's a must start, but I still think, against this Cowboys defense, they're 24th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight end. So it's a pretty good matchup. I definitely think Goedert's usable.
He's certainly not a lock in any given week because they do have those potentially dominant wide receivers. He has been 13th among tight ends in target share, which is decent, not amazing. From week 2 on, he had that goofily quiet week 1 at New England, 1 target, no catches. But from week 2 on, he's been averaging 4.8 receptions, 51.3 yards per game. Only 5 tight ends sit ahead of those numbers in each category, 74.5% catch rate. So he's been efficient on what he has gotten. The Eagles are 3.5-point road dogs here in the game with the week's highest over-under. So plenty of shootout potential here, plenty of potential for volume upside in passing. So, like you said, Dallas Goedert's not a lock for numbers this week. It's unlikely, I think, that you have 2 good tight end options that you're choosing between. So I think in all likelihood, most folks that have Goedert as an option, he will make sense for you this week.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at our tight end rankings to see where he sits, but I think it's possible someone has Dalton Kincaid and Dallas Goedert. I would still start Kincaid even with Dawson Knox likely back this week. I would start Jake Ferguson over Dallas Goedert this week in that same game. And then you get to guys like Taysom Hill, we got to see about. He has a couple injuries and did not practice on Wednesday, so we'll see about him. And then like David Njoku, I think is the line for me with Dallas Goedert, where those guys are super close to me. I think Goedert, easily wins on upside just because of the offense he's in and the talent he has. But I think Njoku is probably a bit safer target bet at this point. It might have the higher floor.
I agree with both of those. So it's going to be a coin flip if you do have that decision to make. If you have a decision on defense, either this week or beyond this week, we've got some help for you there. We're going to talk about weeks 15 through 17 here. You can check the waiver wire article from earlier this week for week 14 options, maybe some defenses that can help you beyond week 14. And of course, you can always check your free agent finder to rank by the current matchups, rank by next week's matchup, look at our rankings for this week. And our rest of way rankings, they have a lot more of an eye toward those upcoming matchups for defenses than they do at the other positions, because that matters a lot. You're going to play a defense that's going against the Jets or the Giants, even if it's not a good defense for the season. So Jared, 4 weeks, 15 through 17, playoff weeks in nearly all leagues. What do you like? What maybe non-obvious defense could be out there that might be helpful over that span?
Well, I would start by just checking if the Chiefs get dropped in your league with this matchup against Buffalo this week. I think there's a chance they're going to get dropped in some leagues, especially with shallow benches. I would grab the Chiefs. I would try not to use them this week, but stash them as a second defense because their next 3 games after Buffalo are New England, Las Vegas, and Cincinnati. I would imagine the Chiefs will be, top 10 defense in our rankings for all 3 of those, maybe even a top 5 defense for all 3 of those matchups. The other much less obvious team you could consider grabbing right now, the Rams have pretty easily the best defense schedule by our adjusted points allowed from weeks 15 through 17. They get Washington, New Orleans, and then the Giants. Now it's not a great defense, but those are 3 great matchups. So I would guess, you're going to find the Rams somewhere between like 8 and 14 in our defense rankings, week 15 and 17. You can probably do better by just, picking defenses by week in leagues where, these defenses aren't all stashed. But if you're in a deeper league where it's tough on the waiver wire, I do think the Rams are going to be okay for you for those 3 playoff weeks.
Couple more stashes that I like, and starting for week 14, we've got the Packers. I love their rest of way schedule for the team defense. They're at the Giants this week, against the Bucks in week 15, which I don't like as much, but then at the Panthers, at the Vikings, plenty of upside in both of those. So maybe you pair the Packers with a better option for week 15. And Houston could be one of those pairing options. Houston is at the Jets this week, then at the Titans, against the Browns, and home for the Titans. I think Houston's probably going to be inside our top 12 for all 4 of those matchups. Not a good defense overall, but they do have some solid pass rushing upside, and they have been intercepting a lot more passes since Derek Stingley came back from IR. So that's definitely a weekly upside defense against 4 straight teams with turnover upside.
Yep, I like that call. And again, just at this point of the season, like, be willing to roster 2 defenses, because there's no need to stash wide receivers you're hoping to break out. You still want to be stashing the handcuff running backs, but outside of those types, it makes a lot more sense to be stashing these defenses than other positions.
And it's also the time of year where you can dump a defense that's been scoring for you all season. Cleveland is one that I would have been ready to dump this week for this Jacksonville matchup. I think that changes because of Trevor Lawrence being out. Now it's a positive matchup with C.J. Beathard in there. But, even the week 15 matchup with the Bears is one that could go either way. That can be a tough one. So I wouldn't be scared to play somebody over Cleveland in that one. And then after that, they're at the Texans, week 17 against the Jets. So, weigh that, and maybe even instead of dropping the Browns, you find another one of the defenses we already mentioned to pair with them on your team.
Dallas, who I believe leads defenses in fantasy scoring in most scoring systems. Their next 4 games: Philly this week, Buffalo, Miami, Detroit. I had a member email me earlier this week, and I told him to drop Dallas for like 2 of these crappier defenses that just have good matchups. I don't think Dallas is a good start on paper, at least in any of these next 4 games. They could still do it, right? It's defense, and Jerron Bland is probably going to get another pick 6 at some point here, but like on paper, or 3. Yeah. I mean, on paper, there's not a good place. I'd be fine dropping Dallas for, something like, the Rams plus the Texans, or, some combo like that where you're just getting better matchups the rest of the way.
Yeah, that's where you want to treat defense different than other positions. Doesn't matter what it's done for you all season. It's not Patrick Mahomes. The Cowboys defense is not Patrick Mahomes. That matchup matters. So check our waiver wire pickups article from week 14. We've got more on defense options for you for week 14 as well as beyond. Check the free agent finder. You can sort either by week 14 or by rest of season rankings. You can sort by specific matchups for the next 2 weeks, and check the strength of schedule pages. We've got defenses in there. We've got the other positions in there if you want to look for a platoon option to see maybe who you could pair with Patrick Mahomes if you're nervous about the way he's been producing lately. We've got you covered. Of course, all of it is available because we want to help you win your season.